Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm from Alley. You can tell because I'm wearing this shirt. So we're going to talk about Gutenberg and published Apple News. So Alley develops the published Apple News WordPress plugin. It transforms your WordPress content from primarily HTML into the JSON format that gets sent up to Apple via their API. And we recently released version 2 of this plugin, which had full native support for Gutenberg, so I'm going to talk about that. Oh, that's fun. So the font's not small, but it used to have a darker background, but that's cool. So Brad was up here talking about us a little bit earlier. We're a full-service digital agency. We're a WordPress VIP partner, fully distributed. Everybody works from home or co-working spaces. We're hiring. You should talk to me about a job. It's great. So the challenge in releasing version 2 and making this plugin fully Gutenberg compatible was that we had to embrace the future of WordPress while not losing our users who were not fully embracing Gutenberg. So this largely came down to like meta boxes versus not meta boxes, and the interesting situations, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, where maybe some of your website is Gutenberg and some of it's not, or you've got some websites that are and some websites that aren't, and we had to support all of those different kinds of situations. So there's sort of 3 goals here. The first goal, of course, was building a Gutenberg native experience for the published Apple News plugin. So we wanted to have that native like plugin sidebar kind of an experience where if anybody's used the latest version, for example, of Jetpack and Gutenberg, they have a sidebar. Yoast has a sidebar. I sort of dread when all of the plugins have a sidebar because it's going to get cluttered, but that's sort of the approach we were taking to this, is to build that kind of a sidebar experience in Gutenberg. We also wanted to add any new features that were part of the update to the classic meta boxes as well. So we didn't want to introduce new features only for people who were using Gutenberg. We also wanted to have those available to folks who were not using Gutenberg yet, or maybe not everywhere, and so we wanted to make sure those were available in the classic meta box as well. And finally, don't break anything. And this was an important one because we had to have the plugin work in this sort of different set of circumstances where Gutenberg's on completely, or it's off completely, or it's on for some posts but not others, or there's a user who's not on WordPress 5 yet. They've sort of frozen their version at 4.9.8 or what have you. Or they're users of different versions of 5.0 plus, which has different versions of the Gutenberg JS. And in some cases, you're disabling it via the Classic Editor plugin, or you're on WordPress VIP, and you're using the Gutenberg Ramp plugin to selectively enable it. So there's all these different kinds of use cases in which someone might be using this plugin, and had to work for all of these different cases. Number 3, if you're wondering, was the most difficult out of the 3. But the opportunity here is that we can really provide a better experience for editors who are using this plugin. We were starting to grow outside of the bounds of what the meta box could provide, and for those of you who have worked on big WordPress sites, before Gutenberg, you ended up with this huge quantity of meta boxes that just goes down the page. I'd given a talk at a previous WordPress conference where I showed an example of one of the meta boxes on our site, and I took screenshots of it. I originally tried to zoom the page out to try to get the entire meta box in one screenshot and failed. And so then I had to break it up into several different slides. I took full screen screenshots of this. It was 17 slides until I got to the end of one meta box. So that's kind of absurd. And there's some things you can do in Gutenberg to sort of selectively look at pieces of content or areas of editing, which just provide a better editorial user experience. So part 1 of that is be able to intentionally hide and show that Apple News sidebar. So you have to click on the Apple News icon in the top right to show the sidebar. Otherwise, that sidebar is going to get used for other things in Gutenberg, like your document metadata, or if you click on a block, it's going to be the inspector controls for the block. And that sidebar area can get used for a whole lot of different things, and you don't need to have that real estate taken up by Apple News if you're not actually configuring Apple News. So that was really nice. And the native Gutenberg controls kind of solved a lot of our user experience challenges. One of the things that we did in a version prior to this in the plugin was we needed to add some support for cover art. And has anybody used cover art in Apple News? A few, yeah, not many. You kind of have to opt into it, and Apple has to review and approve your stuff, so it's not one of our more highly used features. But for those of you who do use it, it provides a lot of editorial control over the imagery that gets used and featured in various sections in Apple News. So in order to configure cover art, you have to upload like 6 different images. And we were starting to add all this stuff to the sidebar, and that sidebar is just like going on for days. And so we had to come up with a way to be able to look at different areas within published Apple News and configure specific things. The JavaScript on the published Apple News plugin prior to the Gutenberg integration was a whole bunch of jQuery, unminified, unpreprocessed, no transpilation, no polyfills, no nothing, just like flat JS files that we edited. Which was fine at the time, but then being able to take advantage of some of those controls within Gutenberg, like panels that expand and collapse and conditionally hiding and showing things using React was really game-changing for us. And we have a new feature, which is we added some API endpoints to help with the Gutenberg integration with Apple News. And one of the things you can do now is right from within that sidebar, you can hit a delete button, and that sends a request out to Apple to delete that article from Apple. Every once in a while, you end up with a situation where the plugin is designed to work as the sole source of truth, and it's supposed to send information to Apple, delete your articles for you. Sometimes that can get out of sync if someone goes into iCloud, for example, and deletes the article from there. The plugin gets a bit confused because it thinks it's in control, and it's not. And so this allows you to either send the request to delete the article without deleting it in WordPress, or it can also help to clean up that data in WordPress if it was deleted externally. So how do we do? I got a bunch of screenshots here. Basically, they're all in black and white. I was going to say I've got a nice, pretty blue button here, except it's disabled because the article's already published. But in the publish area, this is in the top right in the Gutenberg editing interface, next to the publish button, and this is on a very basic installation. So you just have your normal gear, and then there is the icon for Apple News. That was kind of interesting to get working. You have to load it in as an SVG, and I had to fiddle with it a bit, but it came out okay. If you can't tell, I'm not a designer. I'm not a front-end developer. I'm somebody who really enjoys the process of transforming HTML into JSON. I'm kind of strange in that way. So I appreciate it when design things are easily accomplished via code that's accessible to me. So that's one of the reasons why I like Gutenberg a lot. I can make interfaces that don't look bad, being not a designer and not super skilled at front-end. So this is what the plugin sidebar looks like for the Apple News plugin. The first section, this is always exposed. This is where you can configure what sections it's going to show up in, whether or not it's a paid article. So this is for Apple News Plus. You can send the flag to say this should be behind the paywall. You can set it up as a preview. You can set it up as hidden. And you can check to say it's a sponsored article. And then below that, there are these 4 expand and collapse panels. And so it's the same ones that you would see in the meta box, right? It's the maturity rating, pull quote, cover art information, published information, which is sort of the dump from the API of all the data about the article. And now these are in these nice sort of Gutenberg native hide and show, expand and collapse windows. And then if you expand out the published information, for example, this is all the information that comes back from the API. There's the delete button. I promised you. It was great. It's in there twice. Okay. Anyhow, so that released recently. I mentioned that we tried not to break anything. So we're on version 2.0.5, I think. So we broke a few things. When we released the plugin, we started to get some feedback from some of the users that they were in some of these kind of edge case scenarios where it wasn't, it's Gutenberg selectively enabled via particular means. And so in all of our testing, everything was coming back fine. But in their particular use case with how they had things set up, they were getting, object undefined errors in JavaScript or something like that. And so we had to go back and fiddle with it just a little bit. There's sort of a long-standing issue in Gutenberg where there's not a great way to tell when a post is done saving. Because Gutenberg can send up to 2 different requests to save post data. One is the normal REST API request with the information that comes out of Gutenberg, and there's a second one, which is to save metabox information that only fires if you have metaboxes, but there's no way to tell when the first request goes if the second request is also going to fire. So there's not a great way to tell either in Gutenberg or in the backend PHP when that save operation is actually done, which makes doing something like synchronizing data up to the Apple News server when the document's done saving, including post meta, is a really hard problem to solve. So the solution that we put into place works, but it would sort of be better if there was a native core way of being able to do that, either in JavaScript to send the request via the API, or in PHP to say, yes, this document is done saving, and now I'm going to take my action, send it up to the API. So, questions? Sorry, we went way technical there at the end, so hope you're all awake. Yes?
So you said it supports the old versions as well. Like, is the code base, is that old code base just still in there, and you either toggle it on or off depending on whether you expect Gutenberg to enable it or not, or how does that?
Basically, there's a couple of forks in the code. One of the forks in the code is what enables the meta boxes or not. There's a hook for enqueuing block editor assets, and so that's what we use to enqueue the JS for Gutenberg. By the way, if you're not using that hook to enqueue your Gutenberg JS assets, it's going to explode, which we found out. So the PHP that processes stuff on the back end, in some cases we had to fork that logic based on whether Gutenberg's active or not. A lot of it is still the same. So the core of the plugin is an HTML parser that converts data to JSON. And so that piece of it has not changed. It's really just like the hooks of how you get there. So in Gutenberg, it's like setting that post meta and those options on the post, and then how you get to the point of triggering that post save hook, which, as I mentioned, is a bit tricky. But most of the code is still the same. And until we basically make a determination that we're going to only support Gutenberg, which I'm sure is going to be years out because the transition period is going to be very long, we're going to have to support both of those methods of updating data. All right, let's go get beers. Thanks.